Somewhere in the Persian Gulf, in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, a signal was intercepted. Not a missile, not a warship, not even a troop movement. A message, precise, deliberate, and calculated to send the most powerful military on Earth a very specific warning. According to multiple intelligence assessments corroborated by defense analysts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, Iranian military officials, speaking through back-channel diplomatic communications, delivered a message that stunned Washington's national security establishment. The message was simple, devastating, and almost certainly intentional. We know exactly where your F-15s are. We know where your F-35s are parked. We know your patrol rotations. We know your refueling schedules, and we know the names of the personnel. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't propaganda. This was a demonstration of capability. A precise, verifiable intelligence package delivered with the cold confidence of an adversary who had been watching, learning, and mapping for years. This is the story of how it happened, why it happened, and what it means for the next chapter of the most dangerous geopolitical standoff of our generation. Stay with me. To understand this moment, you have to understand the geography of American military power in the Middle East. Udeid Air Base in Qatar sits at the center of it all. It is the nerve center of U.S. Air Force's Central Command, AFCENT, and it houses some of the most advanced war-fighting machinery in human history. F-15E Strike Eagles, F-35A Lightning Daewoo-2s, B-52H Stratofortresses, KC-135 Stratotankers, surveillance drones, cyber warfare platforms. At any given moment, Udeid is home to over 10,000 American military personnel and operates what defense analysts at the Stimson Center describe as the most complex air operations center on the planet outside of the continental United States. To America's enemies, Udeid is a crown jewel, a concentration of power so dense, so strategically critical, that neutralizing it, or even credibly threatening it, would reshape the entire balance of deterrence in the region. And now, Iran was claiming it knew exactly how to do it. But here is what the mainstream media largely missed. This wasn't a sudden development. This was the culmination of a 5-year intelligence architecture that Iran, with direct support from Russia and indirect assistance from Chinese signals intelligence infrastructure, had been quietly building since the Abraham Accords of 2020 fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the region. When the UAE and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel, Iran lost its most powerful psychological deterrent. The idea that Arab states would never openly align with the Jewish state against Persian interests. The walls closed in, the noose tightened. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, pivoted hard toward one specific strategy: asymmetric intelligence supremacy. If you can't outgun the Americans, you outsee them. You map their movements. You infiltrate their networks. You recruit their contractors. You fly drones at the edge of their radar envelopes until you know their detection gaps better than they do. You become the eye that never blinks. And by late 2024, according to threat assessments cited in testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Iran had done exactly that. When fragments of this intelligence breach reached the American defense establishment, the reaction was immediate, and it was compartmentalized to a degree not seen since the fallout from Edward Snowden's 2013 revelations. The Pentagon ordered a full operational security review across every forward deployed asset in the CENTCOM theater. That's 5 countries, dozens of installations, thousands of individual personnel with varying security clearances. According to defense insiders, quoted anonymously by outlets including Defense One and Breaking Defense, the phrase used internally was catastrophic OPSEC failure. And the question being asked at the highest levels wasn't if Iran had this intelligence. It was, how long have they had it? In Moscow, the reaction was quieter, but unmistakably satisfied. Russia had long provided Iran with intelligence infrastructure, specifically advanced electronic warfare and signals collection systems first deployed in Syria during the 2015 Russian military intervention. By embedding signals intelligence collection nodes across Syrian territory, and by leveraging the presence of Hezbollah's extensive ground network stretching from Lebanon through Syria into Iraq, Russia had effectively built a surveillance architecture in the region that fed directly back to Tehran. Russian state media outlet RT ran a segment carefully framed as analysis, noting that, quote, American overconfidence in technological superiority has historically been the precursor to its most significant strategic defeats. The subtext was crystal clear. China's reaction was even more calculated. Beijing had, in the preceding 18 months, dramatically deepened its economic and security relationship with Tehran through the implementation of the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement signed in 2021. A $400 billion strategic partnership that, on the surface, looked like infrastructure investment. Ports, roads, telecommunications. But telecommunications infrastructure, as any intelligence professional will tell you, is never just telecommunications infrastructure. China's Huawei and ZTE, both of which have been barred from U.S. networks for precisely this reason, had installed signal routing equipment across Iranian territory. American cyber intelligence analysts at Fort Meade were, according to multiple credible reports, deeply alarmed by the degree to which Chinese-built infrastructure had given Beijing, and by extension, any party Beijing chose to assist, near total visibility into electronic emissions across the Gulf region. Financial markets registered the shock almost instantly. Defense sector stocks surged. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman all spiked on unusually heavy volume. Oil futures climbed 3% in a single session. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply transits, suddenly looked a great deal more vulnerable than it had the week before. Now let's talk about exactly how Iran built this capability, because this is where it gets technically remarkable and strategically terrifying. The modern battlefield is electromagnetic. It is a constant churning sea of radio frequencies, radar pulses, communication signals, and electronic emissions. Every aircraft that takes off emits a signature. Every radar installation broadcasts a waveform. Every encrypted radio transmission, even if its content cannot be decoded, reveals information through its timing, its frequency, its direction, and its intensity. This is what intelligence professionals call ELINT, electronic intelligence, and it is the bedrock of modern signal surveillance. Beginning around 2019, the IRGC dramatically escalated its drone operations in the Persian Gulf and surrounding airspace. Most Western analysis focused on the offensive potential of these drones, their ability to strike oil tankers, attack Saudi infrastructure, harass American naval vessels. But the more significant mission, hiding in plain sight, was passive. Reconnaissance, signals collection, electronic order of battle mapping. Iranian Shahed series drones, and their more advanced derivatives, were fitted with ELINT collection packages that, while not as sophisticated as American or Russian equivalents, were more than capable of passively recording radar emissions, communication frequencies, and aircraft identification transponder data over extended collection periods. Fly these drones near enough to American installations often enough, and you begin to build a picture, a very detailed picture. Then add the human intelligence layer. According to a 2023 indictment by the U.S. Department of Justice, Iranian intelligence recruited multiple individuals with access to American defense contractor networks in the Gulf region. These weren't high-ranking officials. They were logistics contractors, IT support personnel, local nationals with access to unclassified but operationally sensitive information about base schedules, maintenance rotations, and aircraft configurations. Small pieces, but assembled correctly, like pixels forming an image, they became something devastating. And here's where the Russian connection becomes critical. Because Iranian ELINT capability, while improving, had a fundamental limitation: processing power. The ability to take thousands of hours of raw signals data and extract actionable intelligence requires sophisticated algorithms and significant computing infrastructure that Iran, under crushing international sanctions, struggled to develop independently. Russia filled that gap. Starting with the deployment of Russian military forces in Syria in 2015, a quiet but extraordinarily significant intelligence partnership evolved between Moscow and Tehran. Russian GRU and FSB signals experts provided Iranian counterparts with analytical frameworks, software tools, and direct technical assistance in processing ELINT collection. In return, Iran provided Russia with something equally valuable: ground-level human intelligence networks across the Arab world that Russia's intelligence operatives could never develop independently. It was a perfect exchange: Russia's technical sophistication, Iran's human network, China's telecommunications infrastructure. And suddenly, the IRGC had a surveillance capability that dwarfed anything American planners had assumed adversaries in the region could achieve. The F-35, the most expensive weapons program in American history, $150 million per aircraft, designed to be virtually invisible to radar, designed to operate in contested airspace without being detected. And yet, because of the electromagnetic emissions from its ground support systems, its communication links, its maintenance equipment, even the F-35 leaves a traceable footprint when it lands, when it is fueled, when its avionics are being serviced. Iran had mapped that footprint with extraordinary precision. History is a mirror that powerful nations rarely look into honestly. The United States has experienced this before, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And each time the failure followed the same pattern. An adversary was underestimated, not because the intelligence wasn't available, but because the institutional arrogance of American strategic thinking made it psychologically difficult to believe that a lesser power could achieve what they were, in fact, already achieving. In 1941, American cryptographers knew Japan was planning an offensive operation in the Pacific. The decoded diplomatic cables pointed toward it. The radar operators at Opana Point on Oahu detected incoming aircraft on December 7th and reported it. It was dismissed. The attack on Pearl Harbor killed 2,403 Americans and crippled the Pacific Fleet. The intelligence had existed. The institutional will to believe it had not. In 1983, the CIA station chief in Beirut, one of the most deeply embedded American intelligence operations in the Middle East, was obliterated by a truck bomb. 63 people were killed. The Hezbollah-affiliated operation that carried it out had been tracking American intelligence personnel with extraordinary precision. They knew who the Americans were, where they met, and what their schedules looked like. They had a human intelligence network so deeply penetrated that virtually every CIA asset in Lebanon was compromised. America's most powerful intelligence service had been outplayed by an organization it had systematically underestimated, and in 1996, the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia, a U.S. Air Force housing complex. The attack killed 19 American service members and wounded nearly 500. The perpetrators, Iranian-backed Saudi Hezbollah, had conducted meticulous pre-attack surveillance for months. They had mapped entry points, patrol schedules, guard rotations, and blast radius vulnerabilities with the kind of precision that only comes from sustained, patient intelligence collection. The pattern is always the same: patient adversary, overconfident superpower, devastating surprise. And here we are again. There's another historical parallel that deserves serious attention, and it comes not from the Middle East, but from Cold War Europe. During the 1970s and 1980s, Soviet military intelligence conducted an operation codenamed Ryan, Raketno-Ядерное Napadenie, or nuclear missile attack. The mission was to monitor American and NATO military installations so comprehensively that Moscow would receive warning of any planned nuclear first strike with sufficient time to respond. Soviet intelligence officers were deployed to count the number of lit windows in Pentagon offices after midnight, to track blood bank activity near military installations, to monitor unusual patterns in American military personnel leave schedules. The Soviets understood something deeply relevant today. Knowing where your enemy's weapons are isn't just a tactical advantage. It is a strategic deterrent of the first order. If you can credibly demonstrate that you know where the missiles are, where the jets are, where the command nodes are, you transform the entire calculus of a potential first strike. Because now your adversary knows that any attack is not a surprise. It is a declaration. And the response will be ready. Iran had studied this playbook, and it was implementing it. But behind the headlines, behind the intelligence assessments and the Pentagon briefings and the diplomatic back channels, there is a deeper story, and it is, as always, about power, resources, and the architecture of global dominance. Iran sits atop the fourth largest proven oil reserves on Earth, approximately 208 billion barrels, and it controls the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile-wide choke point through which 17 to 20 million barrels of oil pass every single day. If Iran closes it, or even credibly threatens to close it, the global economy feels it within 72 hours. Gas prices spike, supply chains seize, consumer confidence collapses. The ability to threaten American air power in the Gulf is not at its core a military objective. It is an economic lever of extraordinary magnitude, and Iran's supreme leadership understands this with cold, strategic clarity. Layer onto this the nuclear dimension. Iran's nuclear program, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency's most recent assessment, has enriched uranium to 60% purity, a threshold that places it within weeks of weapons-grade material if the political decision to cross that line is ever made. The Biden administration's efforts to revive the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action collapsed in 2022. Sanctions remain. Enrichment continues, and the clock is ticking. For Israel, which has made it unambiguously clear that it will not permit Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, the American air assets at Udeid and across the Gulf region are not simply American weapons. They are the backstop of Israeli security. Remove that credible threat, or demonstrate that Iran can anticipate and potentially target those very assets, and the entire deterrence architecture of the Middle East begins to shift. And here's where it gets darker still. Because the intelligence breach wasn't just about knowing where the F-35s are parked. It was about demonstrating the capability to deploy what Iran's military leadership calls its equation-changing weapons. The long-range ballistic missiles, the hypersonic glide vehicles under development with Russian technical assistance, the drone swarms capable of saturating air defense systems through sheer mass. In April 2024, in what represented the first direct Iranian strike on Israeli territory in history, Iran launched over 300 drones and ballistic missiles at Israel in a single coordinated attack. The attack was intercepted with remarkable efficiency by a combined Israeli, American, British, French, and Jordanian air defense effort. But military analysts at the RAND Corporation and the Center for Strategic and International Studies noted something deeply concerning. It was not a maximum effort attack. It was a demonstration, a calibration exercise, a message dressed up as a retaliatory strike. And the message was this: we know how to build a complex multi-axis attack. We know how to coordinate timing across multiple weapon systems. We know the gaps in your defenses. Next time, we will fill those gaps. I've spoken to multiple defense analysts and former intelligence officials, their identities protected, who paint a picture considerably more alarming than anything appearing in mainstream press coverage. A former signals intelligence officer with over 2 decades of experience at the National Security Agency put it bluntly: we spent 20 years fighting asymmetric threats that use bombs strapped to human beings. We never adequately planned for an adversary who decided to go asymmetric in the intelligence domain. Iran made that pivot, and we were slow to recognize it. A former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle East Policy was equally direct. The conventional wisdom in Washington for years has been that Iran is a mid-tier power, dangerous, troublesome, but fundamentally containable. What this intelligence development reveals is that containment is a strategy that assumes you know more than the other side. If that assumption is no longer valid, the entire strategic framework needs to be reconsidered. And a former CIA station chief, who spent the better part of a decade operating in the Gulf region, offered the most chilling assessment of all: this isn't about the F-35s, it's about leverage. Iran now has something it can trade. It can show friendly states, Yemen's Houthis, Lebanese Hezbollah, Iraqi militia groups, that American air power is not the untouchable god force that regional actors have always feared it to be. That changes recruitment. It changes willingness to escalate. It changes the entire calculus of every proxy actor Iran controls across the Middle East. The psychological impact is potentially larger than the military impact. And that brings us to the second order effect that almost no one is discussing with sufficient seriousness. Iran does not fight alone. It commands what it calls the axis of resistance, a loose but extraordinarily capable network of armed proxies stretching from Gaza to Yemen to Iraq to Lebanon. Hezbollah alone has an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated the ability to strike targets as far away as Abu Dhabi and the Israeli port city of Eilat. Iraqi militias aligned with the IRGC have fired hundreds of drones and rockets at American positions in Iraq and Syria over the past 18 months. If each of these actors now has access, even partial access, to the kind of targeting intelligence that Iran claims to have compiled, the coordination potential becomes something American planners have not faced since the Vietnam War era: a distributed, multi-front, adaptive enemy who knows where you are, knows where you're going, and has multiple independent capabilities to reach out and touch you. The consequences of this intelligence breach ripple far beyond the walls of the Pentagon. They touch every person who fills their car with gasoline, every investor with exposure to energy markets, every government in Asia, Europe, and the Americas whose economy is wired into the global oil supply chain that runs through the Persian Gulf. The United States is now in the position of having to adapt its operational security posture across the entire Middle East theater at enormous cost and complexity. Forward basing, the entire doctrine of projecting power through pre-positioned aircraft and personnel close to potential conflict zones, depends on those positions being either secret or unassailable. Al-Udeid is neither. And unlike a position that is merely known to the enemy, Al-Udeid is known, mapped, targeted, and has been targeted before. In January 2024, ballistic missiles struck areas near Al-Udeid, in what American officials characterized as a near miss more significant than publicly acknowledged. The economic consequence is equally stark. The mere possibility of a serious degradation of American air dominance in the Gulf drives defense spending upward across the entire region. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, all of the Gulf Cooperation Council states immediately accelerate procurement conversations. The military-industrial complex, as President Eisenhower warned in 1961, has a vested interest in the perpetuation of threat environments. And threat environments, once created, tend to generate their own momentum, but the most profound consequence touches the most ordinary people in the least expected ways. When American military credibility is questioned, when the narrative of technological invulnerability is shaken, it emboldens actions that previously would have been deterred. The Houthi disruption of commercial shipping in the Red Sea that began in late 2023 was already costing global trade tens of billions of dollars in rerouting costs, insurance premium spikes, and supply chain delays. If that conflict escalates, if the Houthis, energized by Iranian intelligence sharing, begin targeting American naval vessels with greater precision, the cost structure of global trade is fundamentally repriced, and that cost gets passed on to supermarkets, to electronics stores, to anyone, anywhere on Earth who buys things that were made somewhere else. There's also a profoundly human dimension to this story that gets lost in the abstraction of geopolitics. The 10,000 American service members at Al-Udeid are not abstractions. They are 22-year-old aircraft mechanics from Ohio and intelligence analysts from Texas and logistics specialists from Georgia. They signed up to serve, and they are serving in an environment where the adversary knows where they sleep, where they eat, and what aircraft they maintain. The psychological weight of that knowledge, and the sense of being watched, mapped, and potentially targeted with precision, is not a number you can put in a strategic assessment. But it is real, and it matters. So where does this go from here? 3 scenarios emerge from the analytical landscape, and none of them are comfortable. The first is managed deterrence. America acknowledges the breach, conducts the operational security review, rotates aircraft and personnel on an accelerated and less predictable schedule, invests heavily in counter-ELINT capabilities, and the situation stabilizes at a new, higher level of tension. Iran has demonstrated its capability. America has absorbed the message. Both sides recalibrate. This is the scenario that rational actors would prefer. And international relations has never been reliably populated by rational actors. The second scenario is escalation by miscalculation. An Iranian drone conducting a reconnaissance mission near an American base is intercepted and downed. Tehran interprets this as an act of war. A retaliatory strike hits American assets. A responding American strike hits Iranian military infrastructure, and a decades-long Cold War becomes something irreversibly hot. History is filled with wars that no one intended to start. The summer of 1914 is the most instructive example. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not intended to trigger a global conflict that would kill 17 million people, but it did. Because the architecture of alliances, the hair-trigger deployment postures, and the accumulated grievances of decades created a system in which one spark in one place at one moment could set everything ablaze. The third scenario is the most strategically consequential, and it is the one receiving the least public attention. It is the scenario in which Iran's intelligence achievement is not the prelude to a military attack, but the foundation of a new diplomatic leverage framework. Iran is not suicidal. The Islamic Republic's leadership has, for all its inflammatory rhetoric, demonstrated a consistent pattern of calculated risk management. Supreme Leader Khamenei understands that a direct military confrontation with the United States would almost certainly end the Islamic Republic as a governing entity. What Iran wants, what it has always wanted, is recognition, legitimacy, the removal of sanctions, the unfreezing of over $100 billion in assets held in accounts around the world, the ability to sell its oil freely on international markets, the acknowledgement that it is a regional power of consequence that must be dealt with, not contained. This intelligence achievement may be Iran's opening bid in the most consequential negotiation of the next decade. We have this capability. We have demonstrated it credibly. Now let's talk about what it would take for us to stand it down. And if that negotiation doesn't happen, if the American political system proves incapable of the kind of grand strategic flexibility that the moment demands, then we move closer to a confrontation that could reshape the map of the Middle East more dramatically than any event since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The difference this time is that Iran has capabilities it didn't have then, and it has powerful friends it didn't have then. And the world, a world exhausted by the catastrophes that American military adventurism has generated in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan, has far less appetite to provide the political cover and coalition support that made those operations possible. There is a scene playing out right now, in real time, in the corridors of military intelligence establishments from Langley to London to Tel Aviv to Beijing, that the public will never be shown directly. It is the scene of powerful people confronting the uncomfortable possibility that the world they thought they understood has shifted beneath their feet. Because what Iran has done, whatever the specific tactical details that remain classified, whatever the precise scope of the intelligence it has gathered, is deliver a message that pierces straight through the comfortable mythology of American invulnerability. The mythology that says, we are the indispensable nation, the unipolar power, the force that no rational adversary would ever dare to challenge directly. That mythology, forged in the fires of Cold War triumph and hardened by 2 decades of fighting insurgents with improvised weapons in the deserts of Iraq and Afghanistan, is the single greatest vulnerability in American strategic thinking today. Because when you believe you are invulnerable, you stop preparing for the possibility that you might not be. Iran prepared. Russia helped. China watched. And the world took note. This isn't just a breach of operational security. It is a crack in the foundation of the post-Cold War order. For decades, the Middle East has been organized around one unarticulated but universally understood premise. American air power is the ultimate backstop. That if any actor in any country in any crisis crossed a line that America drew in the sand, jets would take off from bases that no one could touch, and those jets would reach their targets. That premise has deterred wars, toppled governments, and shaped the destinies of hundreds of millions of people. Today, for the first time, a regional adversary has stood up and said, credibly, verifiably, with intelligence to back it up, we can see your jets. We know where they are. We know what they do. and we are building the capability to make you hesitate before you fly them. The clock is already running. The question being asked in every capital city on Earth right now, in Washington and Moscow and Beijing and Jerusalem and Riyadh and Tehran, is the same question. What happens next? This isn't just a regional conflict. It's a test of power, technology, and truth itself. And the next move will define the balance of global power for a generation. The question is, who controls the next chapter of history? If this opened your eyes to what the mainstream press isn't telling you, then you know what to do. Subscribe to the Exposure Index, hit the notification bell, because the next briefing is already being written, and it may be the most important one yet. This is the Exposure Index we'll be watching.